This program is brought to you from the Margaret Farrow Studio.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm your host, Lisa Pugh. Wisconsin's economy is facing the same challenges as other states, a critical workforce shortage, record high inflation, but the state's strengths to meet those challenges are unique. Department of Workforce Development Secretary-designee Amy Pechacek began at the agency in December 2020 as the state was facing somewhat of a crisis in the unemployment system. She's here today to share her update on that work as well as a perspective on the state's economy. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, let's start with those latest job numbers just released last week. DWD released those employment estimates for the month of June. State unemployment rate remained at 2.9%. That's that orange line on the screen. Wisconsin unemployment continues to be lower than the national rate, 3.6%. That's the blue line. A historic low for Wisconsin, really tremendous recovery from the pandemic. You see that spike in unemployment on the chart at around March 2020. Secretary Pechacek, is that persistent low unemployment show that we are completely recovered from the pandemic? What do you see in those numbers?
So, Lisa, I would say we are not completely recovered, but Wisconsin is definitely leading the way with very strong economic indicators of a great recovery following that initial 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. So, as you referenced, we are hovering near all-time historic low unemployment rates. We actually broke the record a few months ago to hit the lowest unemployment rate in the state's history. We also broke the record of the number of people employed in this state. And we have really enjoyed 6 months of consecutive job gains. And our labor force participation rate here in Wisconsin remains a full 4 percentage points higher than the national average. We're at 66.4%, and the national average is way down by 62%. So we are doing quite well. Overall, in terms of all industries, we're at about a 98% recovery rate for the jobs that were lost to get us back to the pre-pandemic levels. But some industries have been hit a little bit harder. Leisure and hospitality, for one, is at about a 95%.
Any reasons for that?
Well, because wages are growing and wages are strong. And a lot of times in leisure and hospitality, folks there will work multiple jobs to make ends meet. And we are seeing from 2019 to 2021 a 12% increase in wages across the state, all industries aggregate. And so when folks are making more money with just one job, they want to have just one job and spend the rest of their time with their family and doing other things. So it's actually been a great time to be a job seeker. You know, again.
But harder on those employers to keep and find those workers.
Well, certainly, right. There is a labor worker quantity shortage, as you referenced.
We'll be talking about that.
Yeah. And it is not unique to Wisconsin. There's a worker quantity shortage throughout the Midwest, throughout the country, even globally. In China, they're having a worker quantity shortage. And that's actually a result of decade-long trends that are in the making. We've had low birth rates going back several generations. We've had baby boomers retiring, and they're going to continue to retire. And that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Right. And then we've had net zero to negative migration to the state of Wisconsin. So those three factors have really caused that shortage and scarcity of labor.
Particularly in those two sectors, retail and the restaurant industry that you were talking about?
Correct. But again, the good thing about a scarcity of labor, wages go up. And so that has really helped offset a little bit of the pain of inflation that we've seen. Again, another global issue. But, you know, with higher wages, employees are bringing home more money, and that has been a good thing for our workers.
So really a strong picture from these latest job numbers. Something that you said when the numbers were released, you said the economy continues to be strong despite numerous outside pressures such as the conflict in Eastern Europe and continued supply chain challenges. We've heard a lot about those two things in the news. Do you have concerns about those to outside pressures continuing to impact the Wisconsin economy?
Well, certainly inflation is a concern for everyone, and the agency that is responsible for mitigating the effects of inflation is the Federal Reserve. They have done recent interest rate hikes, and they are contemplating additional interest rate hikes going forward to help cool down that difference between supply and demand that would cease or at least bring down that inflation. And of course, as you referenced, the supply chain issues due to global geopolitics have continued to cause concerns for importing goods. But the good news there, especially in Wisconsin, is that means there are more manufacturing jobs in our state. Particularly, we gained 1,400 manufacturing jobs.
That was one area of growth in the numbers.
In June alone, and we think that is a result of a lot of manufacturers wanting to onshore production to sort of mitigate those global supply chain issues. If we make it here, we don't have to worry about wars out in other parts of the world.
So do you expect that growth in the manufacturing sector to continue for Wisconsin then?
So I do. We, our economists are watching this, and we think it is a very strong gain, and it's going to persist. And the other good thing that we're seeing is that those wages will persist as well. Those wage gains are projected to continue into the future, whereas inflation is a temporary condition of a capitalist economy, a cycle. So a lot of those are very good indicators for our state, and we are very hopeful that as we continue to go forward, we'll be in this great position of recovery going on.
Another sector that got a lot of attention during the pandemic was the healthcare sector, and that seems like it's kind of holding steady. I know that your agency issued a report just kind of looking at supply and demand for registered nurses. There's been extra stress on those healthcare workers. Any sense for how we're doing in terms of the healthcare sector?
Certainly. So healthcare has been one of those sectors that is heavily in the spotlight over the last few years with the pandemic. And what the reports have shown is that Wisconsin has stepped up and really met the demand in that area. And we're projecting actually that the demand might cool in some areas of healthcare, cool a little bit down. We do know that with baby boomers aging, of course, they will be a large consumer of healthcare going forward. And so in preparation for those ongoing needs, the Department of Workforce Development has really partnered with a lot of our training partners and put in as many programs as we can to create those career pipelines to the healthcare industry. It's a very stable industry, and there's always great career ladder growth in that industry. So we have brand new healthcare apprenticeships that we've rolled out. And recently, in our Division of Vocational Rehabilitation that works with folks who have a disability, we received a $14 million grant to expand career pathways into 4 STEM areas, one of those being healthcare. So we are really excited about all of these additional opportunities between apprenticeship, between recruiting, between training with our tech college partners, and through our DVR programs to really create that new workforce to continue to meet the need.
So you think that in some ways the pandemic experience helped to strengthen our supports for that sector?
Absolutely. We have really focused on making sure that individuals in our state, even with a really high labor force participation rate, we know that individuals in our state, there still exist groups of folks who are very talented that still want to engage in the workforce but may have a barrier, such as affordable housing, childcare, transportation. And so we have done a lot of work to make sure that we create these pathways that are sustainable and that we help individuals overcome some of those barriers. And we've done that through the Governor's Workforce Solution Initiative, which was his $150+ million investment in removing those barriers. And we've had some very successful outcomes already. So by really helping everyone in our state who wants to work be able to work with those wraparound services that they need to get a job, keep a job, or get a better job, that is one of the reasons why we're seeing such a strong workforce and economic performance for our state.
You're talking about this group of underutilized workers who will become more and more important because of this workforce shortage that we've also been discussing. So let's look at a little bit about what the economist said last week around what they call the labor quantity challenge, those problematic baby boomers, right? The chart shows the trends in Wisconsin's population, in part because of those, baby boomers retiring, leaving the workforce. The yellow line on the chart is showing a comparison with Wisconsin's labor force. The blue line, it appears to be flattening out. The economists called this trend related to the baby boomers retiring. No one's replacing them. How concerned are you about this workforce shortage in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so again, workforce shortage in Wisconsin, not a problem unique to Wisconsin. It's a national problem. It's a global problem. But because we are working so closely with our economists and looking at these projections, we are putting all of the support systems in place to help mitigate this effect on our state. And again, we talked about the labor force participation rate is already very high here, but we know there are folks who want to work that still haven't. And we've broken that down into really 4 buckets of individuals that we're kind of calling our talent traction strategy. It's a little bit of a take on talent attraction, which is another tool that we have. We want as many people to come to the little slice of heaven that we call Wisconsin here as possible. But we know because this quantity shortage is all around us, this idea that, there's 50,000 workers just over the border in Illinois who've got nothing to do is a fallacy. So although we want to attract workers, we think the much better solution is to focus on the workers here to help them overcome those barriers who still would like to participate in the workforce. And again, those 4 buckets, so that includes individuals with disabilities. We know that 1 in 10 adults have a disability somewhere on the spectrum. And in working with those folks and employers, we know that folks with disabilities, given an accommodation or some adaptive technology or on-the-job coaching, will be some of the best employees an employer will ever have. We're talking about another pool would be the justice-involved individuals. So the Department of Corrections is releasing between 6,000 and 9,000 folks from facilities back into communities every year. And we know the best antidote to recidivism is a well-paying, stable job, right? So we are working with the Department of Corrections. We have job centers at over 10 facilities right now of the DOC right inside, so that while folks are still, doing their time and are incarcerated, we can start working with them. The DOC, in partnership with DWD, has developed a lot of different training programs. We've got welding, we've got CNC, which is this computer numerated coding. We have got cosmetology. I mean, we've got a whole spectrum of any, almost every type of occupation that somebody who's incarcerated is interested in. We can help get them trained and ready so that when they release, it's good for them, it's good for their family.
They can walk into a job.
That's right. They can interview before they're even released from a facility. So,
what supports do employers need then to be prepared to hire either a person with a disability or someone who's been incarcerated?
So we work, we've got 54 job centers all around the state, and each of those job centers has a business service team that works with employers to help them connect to these pools. We can do recruitment, we can screen, we can make these connections. We also do look with our economists and do forecasting about what type of industries will be in demand going forward so that we know we're providing relevant training that is going to have a lot of opportunities. And we do that by speaking with all of the employers around the state, taking surveys. Where are your gaps? Where do we need to, continue to help support you and fill those holes in your current workforces? So I would encourage any employer who's having hiring challenges to connect with their nearest job center. On our website, you've got all the locations, or you can just call. We've got mobile career labs. We can come out and do a recruitment anywhere in the state, and we can help, again, screen resumes and connect those folks. We can set up apprenticeship, internships. We can do all kinds of really tailored training to help employers. But I wanted to touch on the 2 other topics.
As you mentioned, people with disabilities and
justice involved. And then we also have veterans who we know as a group have a higher unemployment rate than the general population. So the Department of Workforce Development has an entire bureau that is dedicated just to outreach for veterans and then working with employers to make sure they're vet ready to have an environment that's very welcoming to veterans and will help them succeed. So that could typically mean, support groups, paid leave if needed, or an accommodation if that veteran has a disability. So we work with those employers and those vets. And then that last group is really our emerging workforce and those who are underskilled. So those folks who may have lost a job during the pandemic and don't really have a skill set right now that would make them as competitive in the workforce job search as we would like. So we would help them with training, getting into certification programs, apprenticeships, internships. And, we are doing that all through the state. And we've been doing it since the pandemic, and we're going to continue to do it to support, our businesses and our job seekers.
You've been clearly working very hard since you started. We mentioned at the top of the show you began in December 2020. You kind of walked into a crisis in the state unemployment insurance system. They were, at the time when you walked in, a backlog, 100,000 claims that were waiting in the queue to be processed. A lot of criticism to your state agency around that. Can you talk about kind of the progress that you're making, the updates that have been made to the system?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Lisa, I walked into an agency where I was surprised to see that we were administering benefits, hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars of benefits throughout the pandemic on a 50-year-old mainframe COBOL computer system. I am literally talking a black screen with the green blinky cursor where you have to press F5 to navigate. I was shocked when I saw this. And when I also got to the agency, there were only 2 ways for individuals to get documentation to the agency to prove they qualified for unemployment, which was they could either mail it or fax it. And it was very clear to me when I came in and saw the backlog and the technology that we were dealing with that we weren't going to be able to solve this problem by just people power alone, even though the agency had done a fantastic job staffing up and borrowing employees from other agencies and contractors. They had done a great job. It still was very slow going.
So what does it look like today?
Well, so at that time then we partnered with Google and we were able to do that artificially intelligent super adjudicator, those modelings where we used advanced analytics to move and work through that backlog in a matter of weeks. And once we were able to really, get that money to the folks who needed it, then at that point very timely, we've been able to keep up with that by instituting other new efficiencies throughout the system. So there's a lot. I'll try and go quick. We have
more to talk about.
So we've updated our entire claims portal. Remember when I talked about mailing or faxing? Well, you can now upload a document right from your smartphone. You can take a photo or a PDF. So that those delays of mailing and going through a mountain of mail at DWD and doing data entry, those days are over. Yep. And then on the back end, we instituted artificial intelligence that will pull the data from those documents and push it right into our system. Again, creating efficiencies along the way. We now can do secure messaging, text alerts, so that folks can have access to information very readily. And we then did a plain language overhaul of the unemployment application. So one of the things I noticed was that we had a lot of people going into a hold status during the pandemic who were entitled to benefits. They just weren't quite sure how to answer certain questions because the questions, this wasn't their fault, the questions were full of jargon, legalese, switch from first to third person. It was a difficult go. So we did an entire plain language overhaul so that regardless of somebody's educational background, regional or cultural differences, they can now much more easily navigate that application. So we went through that. Then we contracted with Flexion, a Madison-based technology firm, to update that big behemoth back-end mainframe system. So they are...
So that completely overhauled now?
No, we're in the process.
Still in the process.
It's a 4-year program to get the whole thing done. And what we're doing is an iterative approach. So we're doing module by module. They call it the Strangler Fig. We kind of just break out a module, update it into modern code, put it on the cloud, and then continue to do those
So we
updates.
should be prepared for a future kind of crisis, you think?
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, I mean, again, we're only one
Work in
year into a
progress.
4-year, but
Sure.
we've done all of those efficiencies, and we've done other efficiencies from our Equal Rights Division, our workers' compensation.
I have to ask you, recently the Government Accountability Office issued a report kind of drawing attention to some racial disparities within the unemployment insurance system. And it sounds like with your Plain Language initiative, you're trying to address some of those inequities, but they were pretty stark that Black applicants during the pandemic unemployment insurance benefit time were half as likely to receive benefits as white applicants. What are your reactions to that finding? Were you surprised?
Yeah, yes, I was surprised, but I have to just sort of make sure that we have the right context around this information. So this was for one particular benefit, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. We call it PUA. It was a brand new federal benefit. It was implemented by DWD back in May of 2020, so they were able to get it stood up very quickly, and this predates my time at the agency. But one of the issues with a brand new federal program, and Wisconsin wasn't alone in this issue, either, was that the eligibility criteria, brand new, the benefits of who was eligible, all of this, the states had to kind of wade through under guidance from the federal government and try and push this out as quickly as possible. So it was very clear in getting this result that there were disparate access to the PUA benefits specifically in terms of, were people aware? Did they have the right technology? Did they have the right documentation? Did folks, qualify for this very specific benefit? One of the other issues is the data around the PUA benefits, which is in order to apply for PUA, you don't need to disclose your race, and so we don't have a full picture. Certainly the subset of data where folks did disclose their race, it was not a good result at all. But the good news on that audit was even before the Government Accountability Office came into audit, we had taken many steps, and will continue to take steps to make sure that access to these benefits is improved across the board. It was pretty clear when our data wasn't the best that we really needed to do a lot of things, which we have done. As you referenced, the Plain Language Initiative, we've also taken steps to translate the application into Spanish, which did not exist. And then we were able to receive almost $10 million in competitive grants through 2 separate grants to continue to move the needle on access. And that was through the Department of Labor's Navigator Grant, in which we received $3 million to partner with UMOS, who has inroads to a lot of these barriered populations that don't have equal access to these systems. And so they are going to be out in the community assisting folks to get these benefits, helping with documentation requirements, really creating a lot of that outreach and education. And then we also received a $6.85 million grant. It's called the Equity Grant. And we're so excited about this because in terms of that data problem I talked about, we are now going to be partnering with UW-Madison's Institute on the Research for Poverty to better get data so that we can identify the gaps in our system so that we can eliminate them and improve on them.
Not have that problem again.
Not ever have this problem again, right?
So one other problem I want to talk to you about that you referenced before is inflation, record high inflation. What are your concerns about kind of continuing inflation and its impact on either workers or employers in Wisconsin?
Sure. So again, as we talked about earlier, the agency that is responsible for mitigating inflation is the Federal Reserve. They have taken aggressive and appropriate steps, and I think they're going to continue to do so. That being said, we know that it's an issue, and the 2 core factors increasing inflation right now nationally is the supply chain issues and the energy prices, right? So we have seen some relief at the pump, right? So the crude oil barrel prices have gone down from their very recent significant highs. And the other thing that's really helping folks in our state are those wage gains. Of course, there's always room for improvement.
Are they keeping up with inflation?
So we don't have the current numbers for 2022 yet. They're annual aggregate data that we review and our economists look at. But we have seen significant gains in the wages. Again, from 2019 to 2021, a 12% aggregate across the board average gain. Now, that is very different for each individual, but I think it's a good sign in terms of people in our state having more money in their pockets to help offset some of those costs. Now, we can hope that the measures that the federal government is taking will help cool down that inflation going forward. And again, those wage gains are projected to be permanent. So that's still some good news.
We shouldn't see wages go down again. So.
Well, hopefully, right. That is the projection from our economists. So that's all good news for people in our state.
Even though inflation, not so good news, but we're handling it, I think. Correct. Is what I hear you saying. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, something that's certainly becoming more and more of a election issue. Our candidates are being asked about this, is the state's record surplus. The Department of Revenue projecting potentially by the end of, or July of 2023, so a year from now, a $5 billion surplus. Your state agency preparing state agency budget requests. Are there things that you would like to see funded within DWD that would help Wisconsin, help the economy even more?
So we are really seeing some great results in terms of the governor's workforce solution initiatives. And those are those 3 large grants that are funded through federal dollars through the American Rescue Plan Act. And that is the Workforce Innovation Grant, which is the $120 to $150 million investment for regional collaborations to overcome challenges for the workforce in their area. So we have seen regional collaborations that address the child care, the transportation, the housing. And so, we have announced... And
that's one-time money.
That's one-time money, but but we feel that one-time money can significantly move the needle in terms of impacting those barriered populations and helping those local economies. And in addition to that program, we've also done the Worker Advancement Initiative, which was a $20 million investment through our Workforce Development Board partners. And a lot of that was transitional jobs, which was great for employers. So that is subsidized employees for employers. So this would be individuals who don't have a lot of marketable skills, who've maybe been away from the workforce for a long time. We partner with local employers and provide those folks as subsidized transitional jobs. That gives that, business instant workforce, and it gives those workers instant, access to skills and resume building and competencies in that industry that they may not have had. And we are seeing great results. Over 600 people have gone through that program, have gotten subsidized jobs, and have really overcome some of those barriers. We've heard stories about people who are in domestic abuse shelters, homeless shelters, being able to get a job, get a roof over their head, get their children back. There's somebody who lost a child due to custody, not having stability with their employment, put food on the table, and really transform lives. And of course, continue to grow our economy, and it's just good for the folks, it's good for business, it's good for communities, and we would love to see some more of those success stories funded in the future.
So good use of that surplus would be to reinvest in those regional grants and programs?
Certainly we're looking at a lot of different things, but yes, I think that is one win that would be great to continue. Another is the Department of Corrections. I talked a little bit about our partnership with them in terms of reentry for folks who are coming out of incarceration. We would love to be able to expand those opportunities and just make sure that every individual who's being released back into the community has access to employment for their own success and for that local community's success. And right now, the job market is really supporting that. As you know, with our worker quantity shortage, for every job seeker, there's 2.8 vacancies right now. So it's just making those connections and helping the economies continue to grow.
So the legislature had been strongly critical of DWD during the pandemic related to the problems in the unemployment insurance program. Was that criticism, was that well-founded, or what would you say would have been more helpful during that time?
So the pandemic hit every state hard. No state in this country was prepared for a 200,000% increase in phone calls or claims overnight. There wasn't one state that was prepared. Especially with the Department of Workforce Development having 50-year-old technology, it made the department's ability to be nimble and quick and responsive very difficult. So again, certainly we strive to, get benefits to folks who deserve them and qualify for them as quickly as possible. And we are in a better position now than ever before to hit that, and we're going to continue to move in that direction. One of the other things that we've done to ensure that we don't have some of the same log jams that we had before, if there is ever a new virus that comes and has a similar impact on us, was the call center. So one of the common complaints was that the call center, which back in 2020 was a series of just literal phone lines, calling agents, we have now fully modernized that call center. It's another big modernization win that I want to make sure our team at DWD gets credit for, because they've been working very hard on getting these, updates in place. But we have now moved from, phone lines to a call center, an omni-channel, where our capacity to take phone calls is very, very large. And we have virtual agents, too, that can now answer questions 24/7, 365. The other issue with the call center back at the time of the pandemic was that calls could only be had when the mainframe wasn't, processing checks, which had to start at 5:30 because they had to process all night. But now we've got that ability to get that information to people, much more easily, on time, and transparent. So I think we're, again, in a much better...
Criticism warranted, but in a much better place today.
Every state struggled. I think in terms of what DWD did with the hand that they were dealt, 50-year-old technology, again, actual phone lines, for call centers, I think they did the best they could at the time. And again, we came in, solved the issue by partnering with some global marquee tech companies, and we're really able to do good things for the people in Wisconsin.
Good things looking forward. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing that update today.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to the viewers of Newsmakers. Be sure to tune in again as we sit down with the decision makers and highlight the issues that make a difference for all of us.
This program was brought to you from the Margaret Farrow Studio.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.